Tonight, you're all in for a special treat. I have a special guest joining me for just a few stories tonight of terror, mystery, and horror. ZAKBABYTV will be joining me to help narrate with me. If you enjoy his stories, be sure to check out his channel and subscribe to him. You can view his channel in the description below. Now, I don't want to keep you all waiting. Let's jump in to what you really came for. This is 9 scary encounters with creatures. Story 1. When I was a little boy, I used to live with my grandfather, who happened to live out in the countryside. My grandfather had a pretty big vegetable garden that he tended to daily, and of course, being his grandson, I would go out there every day and help. One day in the summer, he began noticing a lot of his vegetables would go missing. The weird part is, only individual plants would disappear, and not all of them, just the lowest hanging fruits and sometimes the entire plants themselves. At first, my grandfather was convinced it was mice or other rodents and vermin that were raiding his garden during the nighttime, and he wasn't catching it. So, to combat this, he set up a bunch of traps throughout his garden. Everything you can think of: rat traps, bear traps, animal traps, etc. Of course, this went on for days on end, with nothing turning up. He was getting very frustrated and confused to the point to where he was losing his mind at what was going on. Being fed up and having enough, he decided he would stay up one night, all night, to see if he could catch the culprit. On this particular night, grandfather and I was roughly 12 at the time, made several cups of coffee and decided to stay up. It was pretty quiet most of the night, and we weren't guaranteed to catch anything at all. I do remember that, although I don't remember dozing off. But at some point, my grandfather woke me up in a panic, saying he could hear something or someone out in his garden. Him and I both rushed to the door. My grandfather had a spotlight that he was able to shine on the spot that he heard the noise. We didn't see anything at first until we started noticing some eye shine. Whatever was in our garden decided to take off running. The spotlight was shined directly on the area, and at this point, we were able to follow whatever it was out of the garden. My grandfather and I are shocked by what we saw. It honestly looked like a little gremlin, if I've ever seen one. It was roughly 1 to 2 feet tall, brownish darkish skin, weird looking ears that sat on top of its head, and a really ugly face. If there was ever such thing as a real life goblin, this was it. It didn't make any noise, but it bolted out of his garden pretty quickly. My grandfather looked, and I asked him, "Papa, what is that thing?" He never did answer me, and we never did talk about it after that night. But after that, the problems ceased, and we never did see whatever that thing was ever again. Sometimes, I wonder if there is such a thing as tiny creatures and goblins. I've heard other encounters with weird beings like this, although they've been pretty hard to come across. If any of you have any experiences with such a weird thing, reach out to me. Story 2.
I like the desert at night. They say it's dangerous to be out here, but I like it. It's good to sit by a campfire and drink a beer, out here where there isn't any noise or traffic. You can see all the stars because there aren't any electrical lights to chase them away. Sometimes the wind sings to you, but then somebody usually comes along and messes it all up somehow. Mostly it's drunks who want to beat you up because you're from the reservation. So when I hear pebbles shifting somewhere off to my left, the hair on the back of my neck starts to tingle and my hand inched a little closer to my Bowie knife. The figure that came walking out of the darkness didn't look very threatening. Just an old man wearing traditional Navajo clothing and leaning on a crooked walking stick as he shuffled quietly towards me. "Getting cold," came the old man's voice, dry as the desert. I expected him to say more, but instead he just sat down across the campfire from me, laying the walking stick casually across his lap. There was something about him that made me uneasy, and my apprehension increased when his hand vanished into a leather pouch that hung from his belt. But he pulled forth only a crumpled pack of cigarettes, holding them slightly towards me. "Smoke?" "Sure," I replied as my nerves began to relax. When he tossed me the pack, I noticed there were only 2 cigarettes left inside. I took one and tossed the pack back to him. I held my chrome Zippo towards him, but he instead took a little wooden match from behind his ear, scraping it against a small gray rock that dangled from a leather cord worn around his neck. The sudden flare of light illuminated his ancient, weathered face, and his eyes seemed to sparkle eerily for a moment. Then he sat smoking silently. "Dangerous out here at night, you know." He spoke softly for a while. "Lots of things come out at night. Even things nobody believes in anymore. They still come around sometimes." I smiled a little. "You mean ghosts and goblins?" Maybe ghosts," he answered after considering it a moment. "Not goblins, I don't think. Not even sure what goblins are. But there are other things too. Things like skinwalkers. You know about them?" A sudden chill ran the length of my spine as the old man studied me quickly. Mom used to tell me stories about them when I was little," I mumbled. "Then you know what can happen," said the old man. "They take the shape of a man and wear the skin of a man, but they're really more like an animal underneath. They have powers too. Folks used to say only a Sherman could defeat them." He turned his attention to the campfire. His image seemed to ripple behind the waves of heat rising from the flames. Embers danced around him like angry red fairies. "Lots of other things out here too," he continued. "The wendigo, the chupacabra, all sorts of things. They don't come around much anymore, but sometimes they do." Silence settled over us like a damp woolen blanket, the campfire seeming to begrudge us what little heat it was providing. The stars twinkling above seemed suddenly to be laughing silently, sharing some sinister joke amongst themselves. The thin slice of moon sank behind a lone cloud bank, as though unwilling to witness whatever might transpire. The beast attacked us without warning. I felt claws sinking into my back as a great weight fell upon me. Then it was gone, and I rose to see the old man falling backwards. Whatever was on top of him wasn't visible, but I could see jagged rips appearing in his clothing and in his flesh. Then suddenly he was thrusting the walking stick upward, and there was a terrible screeching sound. The creature fell backwards into the fire and became visible as it withered in the flames. I can't really describe it. Imagine a pale white maggot taller than a man, its bloated mushy body bristling with claw-like barbs. something like a mouth at one end and rows of shark-like teeth lining the inside. A clump of black eyes that seemed completely lifeless as it rose from the fire and again hurtled itself towards the old man. I'm not a hero. My brain was screaming for me to get out of there, just to run anywhere, to just get away. But then I heard the old man's screams, and I saw the empty cigarette pack lying crumpled on the ground, and something inside me stopped shaking and started getting angry instead. I tore away my clothes and then tore away my skin as well, revealing my true form. I was springing towards the ugly monstrosity before I really had time to think about it, which is probably just as well. As I struggled with the creature, attacking savagely with my own teeth and claws, I caught a glimpse of the old man rising weakly to his feet. His walking stick was beginning to glow faintly, casting an eerie green light upon him as he moved towards. He plunged the stick deep into the creature's side. The thing stopped biting at my face and made that deafening screeching sound again, but this time, it didn't stop screeching for a long time. I'm not sure if it died or just went someplace else where it faded down from view. I hope it died. The old man reached down to recover his walking stick from where it had fallen, watching me carefully. It's difficult for me to speak when I'm in my true form, but I can manage it if I concentrate.
What was it?
I managed to ask.
No idea,
he answered with a puzzled frown. We stood staring at one another for a moment.
You're gonna need a new shirt,
I pronounced quietly, pointing a talon to his torn and ruined clothing.
That's nothing, he chuckled. You're gonna need a new skin.
But then his smile faded. His grip tightened on the walking stick as he studied me in the campfire's flickering light.
You can relax,
I lisped.
Shaman skin won't work on me.
His eyes drifted uncertainly to his walking stick.
Still,
he said softly,
I'm supposed to try to destroy you. Yep,
I hissed.
Same here, old man.
We continued staring uneasily at one another for a moment longer. Then the old man's smile slowly returned.
Crazy world, ain't it? Crazy world,
I agreed. As he turned to go, I glanced around and saw the shredded remains of my jacket. Snagging it up with a claw, I turned back towards the old man, shuffling away into the darkness.
Hey, Pops,
I called quietly, tossing him the fresh pack of cigarettes that had been in my jacket pocket. I think I managed something like a human smile. He nodded thanks and then vanished into the desert night. I sat back down beside my campfire. A million stars twinkled overhead. They say it's dangerous being out here alone in the desert, but I like it. Sometimes the wind sings to you, and all you have to do is sing back.
Story 3. This happened to me when I was roughly only 8 years old. I remember waking up one night in the middle of the night to go and get some water. I got up out of my bed and opened my door to go down the hallway. Now, let me give you a little bit of info about the layout of my house. Once you get out of my room, you go down the hallway quite a ways, and to the right is the bathroom, and a little bit past that is the living room, followed by the kitchen, followed by another hallway that leads to my parents' place. I stepped out to the hallway, and that's when I froze. Staring at me from not even 10 feet away were these red, glowing eyes. They looked so menacing and evil, and that's right when I heard a deep growl. I was so terrified, I pissed my pants and started sobbing uncontrollably. I didn't know what this was or what had made its way into my house, but I knew I had to get away now. I quickly ran back into my bedroom and slammed the door shut. I then pushed my desk up against the door. I was going to let whatever was out there into my room. The last thing I remember is pulling the sheets up over my head and crying myself to sleep. The next thing I know, my dad is pounding on the door asking me why the door was barricaded shut. It was morning time at this point, and I got up out of bed and moved my desk out of the way to answer the door. My dad was angry and confused as to why I had the door blocked off and my desk in front of it. I explained the situation to him and what happened to me last night. Of course, being a parent, he chalked it up to me having a nightmare or some sort of night terror, or me watching too many horror movies. I promise that what I experienced that night was real, and even as an adult, I look back and reflect and think that it was either paranormal, maybe even a demonic entity, or possibly an alien. I'm not sure what it was, but I hope I never experience it again. Story 4.
This past October, I had worked at a haunt, that is, a haunted attraction at a local theme park. I was pretty good at managing the big crowds. I really enjoyed it when the crowds would get smaller. The groups of 10 to 20 people were coming in to my attraction. During times when the crowds were thinning like that, I loved scaring them with stories and legends I knew about. And one of my favorite legends to tell them were the Skinwalker legends. I would start off greeting the group and tempting them with an offer to tell them a story, asking them if they would like to hear a local legend, as we live in the desert and this haunt was tucked away in the heart of miles of desert land. When they all would agree, I would start my tale. Some of you may know about Skinwalkers, and for those of you that do, you may know that native Navajo and Hopi tribes are fearful to even speak of this creature or to even utter its name. These monsters span from southern Arizona all through the New Mexico and the Mexican border, and across the lands of the native peoples, and Navajo believe them to be witches or shaman, an evil being with the supernatural power to shapeshift, typically by wearing the skin or masks of the animals they wish to walk as, a practice which is looked down upon by the Navajo people. This power is gained after killing a close relative or sibling, and imbues the being with many dark powers. The animal they appear as, however, always looks wrong. A deer or a coyote that stands on its hind legs and walks as a man does, a crow or owl that has a face or eyes that look too human to belong to an animal they mimic, and that glow red in the moonlight. In all the legends, it says there is always one sure way to identify a skinwalker. A skinwalker, no matter what, will never be able to move as the creature it appears as in its animal form. Skinwalkers are able to do other things as well. They can move at seemingly impossible speeds. They can mimic the voice of people, crying babies, your friends or loved ones' voices that you would trust. They will lure you out into the woods or into the pitch black of the nighttime desert. And once they have you isolated and you lay your eyes upon their face, it is said you will die an agonizing death. Skinwalkers can curse people and cause them great suffering. Often, it is said they use a mixture that some call corpse powder when seen in their human form, which turns your tongue black and causes violent convulsions until you die. The worst part about skinwalkers, the reason native people dare not speak of it, it is believed that a skinwalker is capable of reading your minds, and the more aware of them you are, the more aware they become of you. So try not to think about it, but if on your ride home you see a coyote in your path, or hear the drums of native people echoing loudly through the darkness, take care and drive quickly, and pray it will not pursue you. And I would, almost always, be met with looks of horror and fear. It was my absolute favorite tale to tell for this reason. I would tell this story over and over to as many groups as I could. It wasn't a good idea to talk about them. I would say as much with each re-encounter of the legend, and much less in the middle of the desert, surrounded by inky blackness that engulfed everything the park's lights didn't illuminate. But I did. I felt safe. Nothing would happen to me. It was just a legend. That was until I drove home after my shift, around 1 in the morning, after a night of telling this particular story dozens of times to guests. As I drove through the twists and turns of the pitch-black mountainous desert road I traveled each night to go home, my high beams on, penetrating the darkness just enough for me to see the road and the first layer of brush on either side of it. My headlights shone on an animal. A coyote. At first, I thought it had just been the angle of the lights that hit it that made it appear to have no tail. But as I continued driving, I encountered the animal again. 3 times, each within several miles of each sighting. A distance any normal animal wouldn't be able to make, especially when running against the car going 65 miles per hour for most of the journey. Each time I would scan the road for wildlife and I would see it. There, just outside of the darkness, the coyote with no tail, staring at me from the side of the road. My stomach turned a bit, and I breathed deep, trying to tell myself I was just imagining things. The coyotes had tails, and none of them were the same animal. It wasn't possible. It couldn't be. But I knew deep down I was lying to myself. I knew I was wrong. I knew it was real, and it was terrifying. I'm relieved to say I made it home safely that night, but still, every now and then when I drive through the desert in the darkness of night or glance out into my bedroom window into the blackness, I can see that coyote, that Skinwalker. I hope it never decides I know too much, but I think that maybe, just maybe, it visits me to remind me of its presence, that it wants me to continue telling this story, to continue spreading awareness of their presence, so that it may claim lives to those who are the weak-minded enough to fall prey to it. And now that you know the story, maybe it will come after you.
Story 5. I'm a retired forest ranger. Back in the 1980s, I used to work in all sorts of different parts in the US that were remote positions. I traveled and worked stationary many different times in my career. I've had a wide variety of strange occurrences happen to me and to some of my coworkers working out in the wilderness. One time, in particular, I was working about 10 to 15 miles outside of Trout Lake in Washington State. This area is right next to a national forest and is pretty much out in the boonies, right upside Mount Adams. One particular night, I was driving down a logging road traveling to my next location, and I must have driven over something sharp because my right tire blew out. Now, I just pulled over and started to do what you do when you have a flat. I'm in the middle of taking off the tire, and I began to get a peculiar feeling that I was being watched. I quickly brushed it off as I'm an experienced outdoorsman, and there's really nothing out there that scares me, so I continued to do what I do. I remember I had just gotten the flat tire off when I start to notice little rocks being pelted at me in my vehicle. I thought it was the strangest thing. I also noticed the woods were pretty silent, and this was dead set in the middle of August. It was a pretty hot day out, and the forest is usually pretty alive with bugs and other noise, but not tonight. It was eerily quiet. After being pelted with rocks, it was enough for me to quickly get the tire on and get the hell out of Dodge. I flew out of there faster than you could imagine. I'm not sure if it was somebody playing tricks on me or what, but there's no reason anybody should be out there in the middle of the woods that late at night without saying anything, especially to a park ranger. I've told this story to my coworkers and some other close friends of mine. Some of them told me I'm crazy and that it was probably just some deranged camper, while others told me it could possibly have been a Bigfoot. I'm not really a believer in that stuff, so I'm not sure what it was, but make it what you will. All I have is the experience to share for you. Story 6. This encounter happened to my father back in 1972. My dad has since passed away, but he told me this story multiple times growing up, and it still freaks me out. My dad at the time was in his early 20s, working the night shift at some janky warehouse job. Well, it was more like a swing shift kind of thing. He was working like 6 to 7 to 2 or 3 in the morning, I really don't remember. He wasn't there for long. Anyway, he was driving home one night around 2 or 3 in the morning, and his car had broken down. I think his transmission was going out. Out where he was, there was literally nothing around for miles. Nothing. No cars, no phone booth, nothing. So he had to leave his car and walk for a few miles to the nearest house just so he can get on the phone to contact one of his buddies. This was one of those lone, straight, desolate roads. It was lightly raining outside, and it was still a little bit chilly from the winter. I think he told me it was around March or April, if I remember correctly. I do remember him telling me that he was about a mile or so into the walk when things got a little strange. Since there were really no streetlights close by, and both sides of the road were pitch black, since he's in the middle of nowhere, he all of a sudden heard this rushing sound, as if something humongous, like the size of a buffalo or a moose, was rushing towards him as fast as it could. This scared him to death, and he starts sprinting as fast as he could. But as soon as he starts sprinting, whatever it was running after him stopped dead. He told me he rushed for a little bit longer, and he saw a street light in the distance, and he started walking towards it. Nothing happened. He began walking more and more for a few more moments. Nothing. He stood there, waiting to hear anything. Nothing. Just silence in the light rain of the night. So he continued walking towards the streetlight, and that's when whatever it was sprinted and ran at him as fast as it could from behind him. He said it sounded so loud, and whatever it was on all fours. He sprinted as fast as he could underneath that streetlight, but as soon as he hit that streetlight, it stopped. He was pretty terrified at that point, and wasn't really sure what else to do. He kept trekking forward more and eventually found a house where he was able to phone one of his buddies to come pick him up. What scares me is that in the area that he was, there was no livestock or any animal that could have been that large that could have chased him away like that. He told me that as soon as he got to this person's house to use their phone, he was as pale as a ghost and was practically banging on their door to let him in, and that something was chasing him. Of course, the people who answered the door didn't believe him and almost threatened to call the police until he explained himself. I, to this day, don't really know what my dad for sure experienced, and I don't know if I would ever want to find out. Story 7.
Beginning in the early April 1986, the people in and around the little-known Chernobyl nuclear power plant began to experience a series of strange events revolving around sightings of a mysterious creature described as a large, dark, and mutated man with gigantic wings and piercing red eyes. People affected by this phenomena experienced horrific nightmares, threatening phone calls, and first-hand encounters with this winged beast, which became known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Reports of these strange happenings continued to increase until the morning of April 26, 1986, when at 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic stream explosion that resulted in a fire which caused a series of additional explosions followed by a nuclear meltdown. The power plant, located near Pripyat, Ukraine, Soviet Union, spewed a plume of radioactive fallout, which drifted over parts of the Western Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, and UK. Ireland and Eastern North America, large areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were badly contaminated, resulting in the excavation and resettlement of over 336,000 people. The Chernobyl disaster, as the incident was dubbed, is considered the worst accident ever in the history of nuclear power. Following the meltdown, the subsequent explosions and fires, Soviet helicopters were dispatched to the scene, equipped with special firefighting gear. These helicopters circled the plant, dropping clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals onto the burning facility. Most of the fire was put out by 5 a.m., with the fire burning within Reactor 4 continuing to blaze for several hours after. The firefighters who responded were unaware of the nature of the fire, assuming that it was all simple and electrical fire, and received massive overdoses of radiation, leading to many of their deaths, including Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, who died on May 9, 1986. The workers who survived the initial blast and fire, but would rather die of radiation poisoning, claim to have been witnessed what has been described as a large black bird-like creature with a 20-foot wingspan gliding through and swirling plumes of irradiated smoke pouring from the reactor. No further sightings of the Blackbird of Chernobyl were reported after the Chernobyl disaster, leaving researchers to speculate just what haunted the workers of the plant during the days leading up to the disaster. The most commonly accepted theory suggests that the Blackbird of Chernobyl may have been the same creature spotted in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, leading up to the collapse of the Silver Bridge of December 15, 1968. Investigators have suggested that the appearance of this creature is an omen of disasters to come in the area in which it shows itself. The physical description of both the Blackbird of Chernobyl and the Mothman and creature sightings in West Virginia are very similar, and the reports of nightmares and threatening phone calls leading up to these disasters are shared in both cases. A second, less accepted theory suggests that the Blackbird of Chernobyl was nothing more than the misidentification of a black stork, an endangered species in southern Eurasia. The black stork stands nearly 3 feet tall and has the wingspan of nearly 6 feet. This theory, however, fails to take into account the menacing phone calls and the disturbing nightmares. Also, The physical description given by the majority of the eyewitnesses who actually saw the Blackbird of Chernobyl does not in any way match the physical appearance of the black stork. Both the Blackbird and Chernobyl and the Mothman have not been sighted since their respective disasters, leaving us with many unanswered questions. All we can do is wait for the beast to show itself again and give us the chance to figure out what it may be. Unfortunately, it would appear that for this creature to show up again, we will have to anticipate some form of disaster in the area it has selected to appear.
Story 8. In June of 2004, 2 Hispanic men were on their way back from working a long day and were traversing a 2-lane highway. It was roughly in the evening time, and as the 2 men in the truck saw what they can only describe as a man-bat kind of creature flying straight at their vehicle and then right up in the air. One of the men described the creature as terrifying and having a face that looked demonic. Half human, half bat is the best he could describe it. It had piercing red eyes and screeched as it flew up into the air. Both witnesses stated the wingspan to be roughly 12 to 15 feet in length, and it was also pretty muscular from the way they had seen it. Since it flew directly at them, their headlights illuminated most of the beast and were able to get a decent look at it, even if it only was for a few seconds before it shot up into the air. They said it had sharp appendage-like claws on its wings and was fairly tall. They estimated roughly 9 to 12 feet. After the encounter, both men became violently ill for the next 2 weeks to come, and even missed enough work for both of them to lose their jobs, all while being in the hospital. What's frightening about this encounter is that there's a very similar encounter that occurred. Almost the same thing happened to a father and son just 2 years later in September, where they would see the same bat creature in almost the same fashion. It just goes to show you, Wisconsin is home to many devilish creatures. Story 9. In Pitt Lake, there have been numerous reports of Bigfoot sightings for years and years, dating back to even before the 1900s. Many Sasquatch sightings occur near and on creeks that all feed into the lake. Back in the 70s, there was a supposed report of a couple of loggers who were chased out of a nearby area by a supposed family of Bigfoots throwing logs, rocks, and other large objects at them. Not even many years later, a couple of other loggers had been reported missing in the area, not long after starting their work. There have been many other sightings of all sorts of howls, wood knocks, and other bizarre, unexplainable noises that occur at all times of the night. More recently, hikers had reported smelling rotting meat smells in certain areas, and staying away from the entire area in general. The most notorious, though, is when a foreman of one of the logging companies encountered a family of Bigfoot firsthand, and managed to escape without dying. He reported that there were several gigantic hairy humanoids who were extremely aggressive and attempted to bluff charge him out of the woods he was in, and he managed to make it out. He estimated them to be roughly 9 to 10 feet tall and to be massively built. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of strange encounters all throughout the British Columbia and the likes. I hope you enjoyed tonight's episode. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Also, if you enjoyed Zach's content, be sure to check out his channel below and subscribe to him. His content is excellent. Keep your eyes peeled, everyone, for I have many more great stories to tell you that will literally make your skin crawl. Stay tuned.